For 6 stops, a black woman slept against a stranger's shoulder on the last train out of the city, and for 6 stops, that stranger had not let her wake up. Not because he wanted her close, because the moment she opened her eyes and turned around, the 2 men standing at the far door would know she had seen their faces. Rachel Adeyemi thought she had sat next to a sleeping man because the seat was empty and her feet hurt. She had not. She had sat down inside the one place in this city those men were still searching, and the train had 4 minutes left before the doors opened onto the platform, where the rest of them were already waiting. The man whose arms she woke up in was about to do the last thing a hunted man is ever supposed to do. He was about to care whether she lived. Rachel had a rule about the last train, and the rule was simple: sit next to someone, never across from an empty stretch of seats. A sleeping man was safer than a whole carriage of nobody. That was the entire calculation. 11 hours in the trauma bay had a way of stripping a decision down to its bones. She had eaten 1 packet of crackers at 2 in the afternoon. Her feet had filed a complaint her body had already approved and forwarded to management. So when the last train sighed open and she saw the carriage nearly empty, one man asleep in a charcoal wool coat, chin dipped, dark hair fallen forward, she did the math without noticing she was doing it. Empty seat beside a sleeper. She lowered herself down, left a hand's width of space between them, set her tote on her lap, and let the city pour past the black windows in ribbons of light. She did not remember falling asleep. She remembered waking. The arm came first, laid along the back of the seat behind her shoulders, not around her, still as a held breath. Then the voice, so low it moved the fine hairs at her ear, before it resolved into words. Don't move. A woman who has spent 11 hours keeping frightened strangers calm does not startle. She assesses. Rachel kept her eyes half-lidded. She kept her breathing long and even, the slow tide of sleep. And behind that mask she read the carriage the way she read a full bay on a bad night. Fast, total, unsentimental. 2 men at the far door, not sitting. On the last train of the night, with the whole carriage to choose from, they were standing. No phones in their hands. And that was the thing that turned her stomach cold, because everyone on the last train is on their phone. These 2 were watching the window, not the aisle, the window, watching the black glass, because the black glass was a mirror, and the mirror showed them the back of a charcoal coat and the head of a woman asleep against it. Rachel understood, with the flat clarity she usually reserved for a monitor that had stopped meaning anything good, that the safest thing she could possibly do was exactly what this stranger had asked of her. Stay still. Think. She stayed still. Her hand, resting in her lap where a sleeping woman's hand would rest, had come to lie against the outside of her own coat pocket. There was something in the pocket that had not been there when she boarded. Flat, hard, the size of a phone. It was not her phone. Her phone was in her tote. She let her fingers find the edge of it without moving her arm, and felt the smooth, cool face of a screen, and, under her fingertip, faint through the fabric, the ghost of warmth. A screen recently woken. He had put it there while she slept. A stranger had reached across a hand's width of space and slid something into her pocket, and she had not woken, because she had been 11 hours empty, and the train had rocked her under. Any other night that thought would have frightened her. Tonight she filed it, because the 2 men had not moved, and the train had not stopped, and whatever this was, it was not finished. The carriage lights buzzed and dimmed once, the way they did between the old tunnels, and in that half-second of brownout, Rachel let her eyes come fully open against the dark window and looked, not at the men directly, never directly, but at their reflection, the way she'd been taught to look at a wound without letting the patient see her looking. Clean shoes, both of them, polished, dry, wrong for the last train, wrong for the hour, wrong for men who had nowhere to be. The taller one had his hand loose at his side in a way that was not loose at all. It was the stillness of someone waiting to be told. She had spent 2 years learning to read a room she wasn't of. A West African woman on a soul-fast nightline learned early to take the temperature of a carriage without appearing to, where the exits were, who was watching, who was only pretending not to. She had thought of it as a habit of caution. Now it was the only tool she had, and she ran it cold and complete. The emergency handle, red, 4 seats up on her side, the intercar door behind the 2 men, which meant if they moved on the pair, They'd have to come up the aisle, in the open, past every empty seat. Small comfort. Real, though. In her line of work, you built a plan out of small, real things, and did not wait for the large ones, because the large ones did not come. And the man beside her. She catalogued him the way she'd catalogued the men, not with fear, with attention. The stillness of him was not calm. She knew calm, and this was its opposite wearing its coat. It was the stillness of enormous effort. Whatever this cost him to sit through, it was costing him a great deal, and he was paying it without a flicker. And a man who could bleed and bargain and hide inside a sleeping woman's silence for 6 stops without moving a muscle was not a man who had wandered into trouble. He was a man trouble had been built around. She had heard, in 2 years of moving through buildings and hearing things in lowered voices, the shape of men like this. She had filed those stories the way she filed most things that didn't touch her shifts, peripherally, without urgency. They were touching her shift now. She let her eyes fall shut again, and under the cover of a sleeping woman's silence, Rachel Adeyemi began, very carefully, to plan. She talked to him the way you talk when you cannot be heard talking. A murmur into the shoulder of his coat, lips barely moving, eyes front. The shape of a woman half asleep, complaining softly to someone she trusted, saying nothing anyone 3 seats away could parse. She asked the questions that mattered and threw the others away, because there was no time and every word cost breath. Who are they? A long pause against her hair. Then, so quiet it was nearly only air. Not yours, mine. The phone. A number, you call it once, you don't call it twice. Why me? Silence. And in the silence, she understood the answer he wasn't giving, which was that there was no why. She had simply sat down. She had lowered herself into the seat beside him for reasons involving her feet and a rule about the last train, and by doing it, she had become part of a picture the men at the door were reading, a man and his woman, drowsing home, harmless, and he had let her stay part of that picture because the picture was keeping them both alive. She had walked into a lie he was hiding inside, and he had held still around her so it wouldn't break. How long? The pause this time was longer, and she understood it was not reluctance but arithmetic. He was deciding how much truth she could carry and still be useful. They ride the last one, he said finally, breath and nothing more. Every night, waiting for me to be tired enough to take it. A beat. I was tired enough. And there it was, the thing that told her he was not lying, because it was too bleak and too small to be a lie. He had made a mistake. The most controlled man on the train had made the human error of being tired and boarded, and they had been waiting the way patient things wait, and the only reason he was not already gone was that a stranger with sore feet had sat down and made him look, for 6 stops, like an ordinary man going home with an ordinary woman. She should have been afraid. She catalogued the fear, noted its presence, and set it down, because fear was not useful yet, and she was a person who used things. She had learned that on nights when the fear, if she let it in, would have cost someone their life while she indulged it. You felt it later. You felt all of it later, in the car park at the end of the shift with your hands on the wheel and the engine off. Not during. During you worked. Her hand, still resting in that casual sleeping way against the front of his coat, felt him breathe, and felt, under the wool, something that stopped her cold. She let her fingers press, just slightly, the way you press to test for the source. Her fingertips came away tacky. She did not look at them. She did not need to. She had felt that exact wrongness on 100 coats and shirts and hands, the specific tack of blood that has been leaving the body slowly for a while now, and has started to dry at the edges of where it's pooling. He was bleeding. He had been bleeding for the length of 6 stops, sitting upright, arm along the seat, voice level, telling a woman not to move so that he could go on hiding inside the picture the two of them made. And the picture had a clock on it now, a real one, not a figurative one, because Rachel could estimate a bleed the way other people estimate the time, from a glance at the light, and the tack under her fingers, and the slow spread she could feel through the wool, told her he had perhaps 20 minutes of sitting upright and lying convincingly left in him before the color went and the sweat came and the sleeping man performance stopped being something he could choose. After that, he would look exactly like what he was, and the men at the door would not need the reflection anymore. 20 minutes. She hated the number and trusted it. The platform they were rushing toward was where the rest of them were waiting, and the terminal was 11 minutes out. He would still be upright when the doors opened onto it. That was the whole trap, laid out clean. He had held on precisely long enough to be delivered to them conscious. So the terminal was the one place they could not go, which meant she had to make a door out of a train that had, at this hour, only one stop left. The nurse took over from the woman entirely. Rachel knew this train. She had ridden the last one home for 2 years, and before that she had ridden it in the other direction, to nights she didn't like to remember, and she knew the thing almost no passenger knew. There was a stop before the terminal, unlit, announced by nobody. The doors opened there only if you asked. She had gotten off there 100 times. A gray staff door off the far end of the platform led into a supply depot that fed 3 clinics, and on lean night shifts she had been the one sent through that door to sign out sterile stock when the hospital ran short. She knew the corridor. She knew where the light switch was, and where it wasn't. She knew the depot had a second door. The terminal was where they were waiting, so they were not going to the terminal. She did not ask him. She had learned a long time ago that when you are the one holding the pressure, you do not put it to a vote. Her thumb found the small request stop button set into the panel beside the window, ringed in a dim, sleeping red. She rested her thumb on it and felt, under everything, the clean certainty she only ever felt in the worst minutes of the worst nights. The certainty of a person who has stopped being frightened because there is finally something to do. She pressed it. The red ring flared. Deep in the floor the brakes bit, and the carriage lurched, and the lights juddered, and for the first time in 6 stops both men at the far door turned their heads and looked directly at the seated pair. After that it was a code, and Rachel ran codes. She had him up by the lapel before the doors finished parting. One clean pull, the motion of a woman rousing a sleepy partner at their stop. Nothing that read as flight. His weight came up wrong, listing toward the wounded side, and she took it against her hip and turned it into a stagger that looked ordinary, 2 tired people getting off at a dim platform, and she walked him off the train into the sodium dark with her arm locked under his, and her mouth at his ear, saying the only thing that mattered. Gray door, left, move like nothing's wrong. Behind them, the doors held open a beat too long, the way doors do when someone is stepping through them. She didn't look. Looking back was for people who had time. The platform was old concrete and standing water, and one cage light throwing more shadow than glow. Their footsteps came back at them off the low ceiling, doubled, so that it sounded for a moment like more than 2 people walking, and Rachel had to remind herself it was the ceiling and not the men. The gray door was 40 steps away, and he was slowing, the wool of his coat gone heavy under her hand, his weight settling more and more onto her hip with each step, and she talked him across every one of those steps, the way she talked patients across the gap between the ambulance bay and the recess room, flat, constant, giving him nothing to do but the next step and the next. Good, again, with me, again, not the words a lover would use, the words a professional used to keep a body moving after the body had run out of its own reasons. Halfway, his knees tried to fold, and she felt it a half-second before it happened, the small betrayal that runs up an arm before a person goes down, and she shifted her grip and drove her shoulder up into his armpit and took the weight and turned the fold into a lean, and did not break stride, and did not let the pace of her voice change, because the men were somewhere behind them in the dark, and a change in rhythm carries further than a shout. He got his feet back under himself. She felt his surprise at that too, the animal surprise of a body that had decided to quit and been overruled. And somewhere in that wet dark, the most controlled man Rachel had ever sat beside did the one thing the whole night had been holding at bay. He stopped setting the pace. He followed her. The man the 2 behind them were hunting put himself half a step behind a night shift nurse in scrubs and let her choose the ground. She shouldered the gray door. It gave with the reluctant scrape she remembered, and she dragged him through by the sleeve into a black corridor that smelled of concrete and cardboard and the faint clean bite of antiseptic, and she did not turn on the light because she knew where the shelves were, and the light would only tell the platform where they'd gone. 20 feet down, the depot, a low room she knew by heart in the daylight and could navigate blind, which was the entire reason she'd chosen it. Steel shelving in ranks, boxed stock, the second door at the far end that led onto the clinic loading bay, and, past that, a street, an exit that was not the corridor. She had picked this room because it had 2 ways out, and she only intended to give the men one to worry about. She got him against a run of shelving stacked with boxed stock and put him down onto the floor with his back to it, controlling the descent so it didn't drop him, and then she was on her knees in front of him, with her hands already inside his coat, finding the wound by feel in the dark, reading it with her fingers the way she read everything tonight. Low on the side, below the ribs. Bad, but not the worst version of bad. The worst version would have been higher and faster, and she'd have known already. This one she could hold. This one, if the low metal voice on the phone was as good as his relief suggested, she could hold long enough. She pulled a box open blind, felt the crinkle of sterile packaging she'd handled 1,000 times, and had gauze in her hand and against the wound in one motion, and pressed. "Look at me," she said low, and he did, and that was the moment the composure went. Not into fear for himself. She had seen fear for the self 1,000 times, and it had a particular hunted animal quality to it, and this was not that. This was worse and stranger. His eyes found her face in the dark, and what broke open in them was fear for her, for the woman kneeling in his blood who had a home to get to and a reason to live, and no business at all being here inside the worst night of a stranger's life. He tried to rise. He got one hand flat against the shelf to lever himself up and put his body between her and the corridor, and Rachel pressed him back down with a palm to his chest, firm, absolute, the way she'd have held down anyone whose heroics were about to cost them the pressure on a bleed. "Don't move," she said. His own words, handed back to him in the dark. Something crossed his face at that. Not quite a smile. Too much pain in it for a smile. But the near thing, the flicker of a man hearing his own instruction turned around on him by the one person in the city who wasn't afraid of him. "Hands, stay here." She took his hand off the shelf and pressed it over the wad of gauze she'd pulled blind from the nearest open box, guiding his fingers into the pressure, teaching him the job. "You hold. I watch the door." Behind her, on the steel shelf where she'd set it, the phone screen she'd taken from her pocket and pressed once had gone from a dim standby to a single word, glowing, connecting, and the gray corridor door, 40 feet back, began to open. She heard it before she saw it, the scrape she'd made herself, now made by someone else. Rachel came up off her knees and turned in one motion and put herself between the man on the floor and the mouth of the corridor, and she did it without deciding to, the way you pull your hand back from a flame, except she was moving the wrong way, toward the danger, planting her body in the gap. A clean shoe found the light at the corridor's end. "Stay back." Her voice did not shake. She was mildly surprised by that and filed it. "He's bleeding out. You want him alive. You stay where you are, because I'm the only reason he's still breathing, and I will stop if you take one more step." It was not true. She would not stop. She would never stop. It was not in her. But the man in the clean shoes did not know that, and a lie told with a nurse's certainty in a dark corridor is a very heavy thing. The shoe stopped. Behind her, on the shelf, the phone changed its mind. Connecting became connected, and a low voice came out of it, thin and metal, saying a name she didn't know, in a language she half followed, and on the floor Wei Zhen turned his head toward the sound, with a relief so total it looked briefly like grief. The clean shoes did not advance, but they did not leave, and for a stretched, unbearable moment, the corridor held all 3 of them, the man in the doorway waiting to be told, the man on the floor with his own blood under his hand, and the woman standing in the dark between them, with nothing in her hands but the pressure she'd taught someone else to hold, and the little phone on the shelf ran its thin metal voice on, and the far end of everything came very close and hung there. Then the doorway filled with other shapes, and the clean shoes were pulled back into them, and the low metal voice on the phone resolved into people who arrived. Rachel never got the shape of it clearly. That was mercy, probably. There was movement in the corridor, and then there was not. The 2 men who had ridden the last train for 6 stops watching a black window stepped back through the gray door and were gone, folded away into the machinery of whatever Wei Zhen was, and the danger drained out of the depot like water finding the lowest part of a floor. She did not move for a long moment. Her hands were still up, still braced, still holding a line against a corridor that was now only a corridor. Then the shaking she'd filed away for later arrived on schedule, and she let it, because she'd earned it, and she turned back to the man on the floor and got her hands back over his and pressed, and told him he was going to be fine in the specific flat voice she used when she wasn't yet sure. He looked up at her. The composure was all the way gone now, and what was left underneath it was a man, only a man, undone and cared for on a depot floor, looking at the person who had refused to let go of him. "Why?" he said, not a demand, a man genuinely without the answer. "Because your side was open, and my hands were free," she said. "That's the whole reason. Now be quiet and let me work." They lived. The people who had arrived had brought the kind of quiet competence that money and fear buy, and there were hands that were not hers taking the pressure, and there was a low black car somewhere above them in the pre-dawn, and there was, at some point, warmth put around her shoulders that she hadn't asked for. The night came apart into pieces, the way the worst nights always did, so that afterward you could never quite lay them end to end. But there was one piece she kept whole. There was a moment, after, the depot emptied to just the two of them, and the smell of antiseptic and the low hum of the cage light, when he was upright against the shelving with the bleeding stopped and his color coming back, and she was crouched in front of him still, closer than the work required now, and neither of them moved to fix the distance. Their heads were near enough that she could feel the warmth come off his skin. The whole night breathed in the gap between them, and in that gap was a thing that had built itself quietly over 6 stops, and a corridor and a floor, and that neither of them said out loud, because saying it would make it real, and real things demanded decisions. "You did that like you'd done it before," he said. His voice had come partway back. The door, the stop, the corridor, a pause. "You didn't guess. You knew." "I work through that door," she said. "I've signed out gauze in this room, at 3 in the morning, more times than I can count." She pressed a fresh pad over the old one, watching the color. "You got lucky in exactly one way tonight. You bled on a nurse." He looked at her for a while after that, in the low hum of the cage light, and she let him, because she was tired and her hands were busy, and there was nothing left in her to perform. And that was when she watched him do the arithmetic. That was the piece she kept. She saw it move behind his eyes, the same cold, competent arithmetic she ran over a failing patient, except he was running it over her, and she recognized the shape of it because it was her own. She had seen the faces of the men at the door. She could name them, or near enough. The people who had arrived and saved them both now knew that a night shift nurse named Rachel Adeyemi could stand in a room and describe an entire carriage, and people like that did not care for loose descriptions of their faces walking around a city, attached to a woman with a home address and a mother and a standing route to a dialysis chair every second morning. There was exactly one version of the coming days in which Rachel kept all of it: the mother, the shifts, the 6 a.m. runs, the small, ordinary, exhausted life she had built 2 years and an ocean from home. And it was the version in which no one ever had reason to notice a woman standing too close to Wei Zhen in the dark, in which the two of them were, and stayed, a stranger and a stranger who had shared one bad train and then nothing, in which the picture they had made to survive the carriage, the man and his woman, going home, was allowed to be, again and permanently, only a picture. She watched him understand that. She watched the understanding cost him something she suspected very little in his life had ever cost him, because his face was a face built for not showing cost, and it showed this. And she watched him decide, the way he clearly decided everything, all the way and without appeal. "Don't," she said quietly, because she had done the arithmetic too, on her own side of it, and she had reached the same total, and she hated the total and could not argue with it. That was the cruelty of being good at math. You couldn't pretend the sum came out any other way. "You have somewhere to be," he said. In the morning, her mother, the chair at 6, the nurse who came at 5:40 to help her into the wrap, the specific tired kindness of that hour, the road home that she had gotten on this train to walk, and had walked, every night for 2 years, before it turned for one night into something else. "Yeah," said Rachel, "I do." He nodded, once, as if she had confirmed a figure he'd already written down, and for a moment, because he was a careful man, and this was plainly the one careless thing he wanted to allow himself, His hand came up, and his knuckle touched, very lightly, the side of her jaw. Not a claim, the opposite of a claim. The touch of a man closing a door from the inside so it would stay shut. "Thank you," he said, "for not running." And then quieter, in the register of a thing said to be true rather than to be heard, "You should have." He gave it back to her. That was the whole of what he did, in the end, and it was the largest thing anyone had done for her in a long time, and she would spend a while learning to forgive him for it. He gave her back the road home. And then, carefully, because he was a careful man, and because some part of him plainly did not want to, and was overruling that part on principle, he took himself off it. Weeks later, Rachel Adeyemi slept upright on a different night train, on a different line, with the seat beside her empty, and no arm laid along the back of it. She had gotten her mother to the chair at 6 that first morning, and every morning since. She had signed sterile stock out through a gray door, and not let her eyes stay on it. She had told no one, because there was no one the story belonged to but her, and it did not want telling, it wanted carrying. She carried it. That was a thing she was good at, carrying what could not be set down. The window beside her held only the dark, and her own faint face and the streaking of the tunnel lights. No one stood in it. No polished shoes, no loose hand waiting to be told, no charcoal coat. The carriage lights did not flicker. The seat beside her stayed empty all the way to her stop, and she woke on her own, the way she always had, and gathered her bag, and stepped off onto her own platform into her own life. She was safe. That was the cost. She had paid it in full, and she had paid it so a woman she loved would make a 6 o'clock chair on time, and if you had asked her, no one asked her, whether she would sit down in that forbidden seat again knowing where it led, she would have looked at you the way she looked at anyone who wanted a simple answer to a thing that didn't have one, and she would have said nothing, and she would have gotten on the train. Some things you carry home instead of the person. The last train pulled away behind her, empty now, its black windows holding nothing at all.